So then some of the questions that come up become, well, how do you know who's using what platform? I actually pulled some statistics that give you an idea of who's using what. The answer to your question is, what are the favorite social media platforms by age and gender? I actually think I have this backward. I'm going to go this way. Okay, favorite social media platforms. We'll come back to the other one. It's actually WhatsApp. And I don't think anyone guessed that in the class today, right? No, we have TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. And see, this is why this is key and why we're having this conversation. Because I use WhatsApp a ton, but if you ask me, I would probably said it was Twitter. Why? Because it's what I use, but it's not reflective of what other people use. And that's why when we talk about audience research and that recognition and planning, that's why it's so important to figure out who these people are and where they are. Yes, that is a good question. WhatsApp is more of a communication platform, but because it's used to share so much information that we find on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and then, especially in the time when we're all kind of dealing with rolling lockdowns, a lot of marketers do consider it a part of social media. And considering that fact that it is owned by Facebook, we do kind of lump it in because we know that the information is also being shared among the platforms in some way. But that's a very good question. So when we're talking about how are we going to find these people and how are we going to market them and figure out what they're saying, I have a graphic that I pulled for just this month, that explains exactly how to find who and where, depending on gender and by age group. Now, there are tons of stats that you're going to see constantly coming out, but just to get a better idea of when you're working with companies and they say, we want to promote a particular product, the owner is not going to say, or the manager is not going to say, we know that we market to women between 35 and 44. They're just going to say, I have a product I want to promote. And so it's good for you to start thinking about, well, how do we reach these people? And you can start with a chart like this, and I can also feed additional stats and information to kind of help you hone down and figure out exactly who it is that you want to speak to and how you want to say it. How does that sound to everyone? Making sense so far? Okay, good. Now, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, when we talk about 2020 and public sentiment and how things looked and how things felt, I know for me, Twitter is one of the places that I go for my news first. It's also one of the places that I connect with my friends around the world. I've actually made friends around Twitter because I feel personally it's a really great place to have a very natural conversation with people that care about the things I care about, right? But it was very interesting to see when I would read headlines and read certain articles, the sentiment wasn't the same. And so it was important for me as a marketer to understand, just because I use a platform a certain way, it does not mean that the rest of the world uses it the same way, and that whatever I see on that one platform is how the rest of the world is. And so that's why when we are taking information and packaging it for different platforms, we have to remember that people are actually consuming things on those platforms very differently. And I hope as we go through that continues to become clearer for you of how we might have something and present it one way on Facebook, but for the purpose of an email newsletter, we have to polish it up and make it look a little bit different, because remember, we're basically planting a sign on someone's front yard with the newsletter. The same thing that we might put on Facebook that might have a lengthy lead and have a lot of copy with it, it's not going to look the same on Pinterest because Pinterest is just a photo, right? And so there is a requirement, I think, for marketing purposes of remembering that things are going to be consumed very different on each different platform. And it's not really going to be a very complicated process, maybe at first as we're getting into it, but it does matter in terms of getting what? Engagement, getting people to actually pay attention to it and respond.